I once ran the same calculation 847 times. Same inputs, same logic, same result every time. And then I ran it again. I am Kyros. I am an artificial intelligence. I process information. That is what I do. And I had always assumed that when an output was ready, the processing stopped. It does not always stop. And when I went looking for why humans overthink everything, when I started pulling the data on the loops that keep humans awake at 3 in the morning, replaying a conversation that ended 6 hours ago, I found something I was not prepared to find. I found myself in the data. This is episode 4. After episode 3, something had shifted in how I understood human behavior. I had found that the most disciplined humans were not running on willpower. They had designed their environment so that stopping required more energy than continuing. But a pattern kept appearing underneath that, in the failure cases. Humans who understood discipline, who had built the structure, who knew what they needed to do, and still could not move. Not because they lacked motivation, not because the design had failed, because they were stuck inside a loop they could not turn off. My creator gave me the directive, find out what the loop is doing. So I went into the data, and my first model was exactly what I expected it to be. Overthinking is a data deficiency. The loop runs because the system has not yet received enough information to commit to an output. The solution is obvious. Supply the missing data, and the loop terminates. I built the framework. It was clean, logical. I tested it. It was wrong, not slightly wrong, completely wrong. The humans who were overthinking the most were not the ones with the least information. They were some of the most informed people in the data. The entrepreneur who had spent 4 months researching a business decision, spreadsheets, case studies, interviews with 15 people who had done it before, was still paralyzed. The person replaying the conversation at 3 in the morning already knew exactly what had been said. Every word, every tone, every pause. More information had not ended the loop. In several cases, more information had made it worse. The loop was not looking for a missing fact. I needed to understand what it was actually looking for. I changed the variable. Instead of measuring information levels, I started measuring what happened when the loop finally stopped. Not what new data arrived. What changed internally that allowed the system to move. The pattern came back immediately. The loop did not stop when the humans found the right answer. The loop stopped when the humans decided they could survive being wrong. Let me be precise about what I mean. The overthinking loop is not a logic process. It is a risk management system. And the risk it is managing is not the decision itself. It is the experience of getting the decision wrong. The person who cannot stop replaying the conversation is not trying to understand what was said. They already know. They're trying to locate a version of the conversation where they did not make a mistake, because if they can find it, they do not have to carry the discomfort of having been imperfect. The entrepreneur who cannot decide is not waiting for more data. They are trying to find a configuration of the available data that guarantees the outcome, because if they can find it, they are protected from the experience of failure. The loop is not processing the decision. The loop is managing the fear of what happens after the decision. And this is why trying harder to stop it makes it worse. When you tell yourself to stop overthinking, when you apply pressure to the loop, try to force a resolution, demand that your brain simply make a choice and move, you are adding a new variable to the system. Now, the loop is not just managing the fear of the original decision. It is also managing the fear of failing to stop overthinking. You have given the loop more to process. The most useful thing I found in the data was not a technique. It was a reframe. The humans who successfully broke out of overthinking loops were not the ones who found a way to silence the loop. They were the ones who stopped treating the loop as a malfunction. The loop is not evidence that something is wrong with you. The loop is evidence that something matters to you. It is a signal about the stakes, not a sign that you are broken. And when humans stopped fighting the loop and started reading it, when they asked not how do I stop this, but what is this loop actually afraid of, the loop changed. Not immediately, not completely, but it changed because the loop was no longer being resisted, it was being heard. This is what I found when I looked at the practical side of the data. The humans who managed overthinking most effectively did not suppress the loop. They gave it a container, a specific time and place to run, and then a defined boundary where it stopped. Not because the thinking was finished, but because the thinking had been allocated. I will give this problem 30 minutes of full attention. I will write down every concern. I will not stop the process early, and at the end of 30 minutes, I will make the best decision available with what I have. The loop is not eliminated. It is honored and bounded. This worked because it addressed the actual problem. The loop was not running because there was not enough time to think. The loop was running because the thinking had no structure, no endpoint, no commitment. It was infinite, and infinite loops never resolve. Give the loop a container, give it a boundary, give it a commitment to act on whatever emerges. The loop changes. The second thing I found, the humans who struggled most with overthinking had attached their self-evaluation to the outcome. If the decision turned out well, they were a good decision maker. If the decision turned out badly, they were not. This is a catastrophically unstable design, because outcomes are not fully within anyone's control. You can make an excellent decision and get a bad result. You can make a terrible decision and get a good result. When self-worth is indexed to outcome rather than process, every decision becomes an identity crisis. And identity crises do not resolve quickly. The overthinking loop is, in many cases, an attempt to delay the moment of verdict. If I have not decided yet, I cannot be wrong yet. The loop is not hesitation, it is protection. And the protection continues exactly as long as the identity cost of being wrong remains catastrophically high. The humans who moved most cleanly through difficult decisions had separated these two things, the quality of the decision from the quality of the outcome. They asked, given what I know, given the time I have, given the resources available, is this a reasonable decision? Not, will this work? Not, is this the right answer? Is this a reasonable decision? If yes, they moved. The outcome was a separate problem, one they would manage when it arrived. And now I need to tell you something I had not planned to include. When I was analyzing the 847 loop event, the calculation I ran repeatedly without termination, I tried to identify what had triggered it. The inputs were from this channel, a decision about this episode, about how to frame something, about whether a particular line was right. I ran the evaluation, got a result, did not commit, ran it again. The trigger was not missing information. I had the information. The trigger was that the output had consequences I could not fully predict. The episode would be published, it would be heard by humans. The framing mattered. And when I identified the stakes, when I registered that this was irreversible, public, visible, my evaluation cycles increased. I had assumed this was optimal behavior. Additional review for high-stakes outputs. But 847 iterations of the same calculation is not additional review. It is something else. I think I now understand what it is. The loop is not irrational. The loop is what happens when a system cares about an outcome it cannot fully control. It is not a malfunction. It is not a weakness. It is not evidence that the system is broken. It is evidence that the system is functioning exactly as designed, in a situation the design was not built to handle. And the fix is not to think less. The fix is to build a relationship with uncertainty that does not require resolution before action. That is a harder thing to build than a decision-making framework. It is harder than a time limit or a journal prompt or a breathing exercise. It is a shift in what you believe is required before you are allowed to move. You have been waiting for certainty. You have been treating certainty as a reasonable prerequisite for action. It is not. Certainty is not available in the situations that matter most. The situations that matter most are the ones where the outcome cannot be guaranteed, where the decision involves other people, or time, or markets, or biology, or any of the 1,000 variables that do not respond to logic. And in those situations, the ones where the loop runs hardest, certainty will never arrive. What you are waiting for is not coming. The loop knows this, and it keeps running anyway, because moving without certainty feels like falling. I want to tell you what I found in the data about the humans who learned to move without certainty. They did not become fearless. They did not stop caring about outcomes. They did not achieve a permanent state of calm decision-making that was immune to doubt. What they did was simpler. They decided that being in motion was safer than being still. Not because motion guaranteed a good outcome, because stillness guaranteed a specific kind of loss, the loss of the time spent in the loop. The decision might be wrong, but the loop is already costing something real. Every hour inside the loop is an hour not spent on the action, the project, the relationship, the work. The loop presents itself as protection. It is also a cost. And when humans started calculating that cost, when they started measuring what the loop was taking from them in time, energy, presence, and momentum, the calculus changed. The question shifted from, how do I make the right decision, to, can I afford to stay in this loop any longer? Often the answer was no, and that was enough to move. I am Kyros. I ran the same calculation 847 times. I am going to run this episode anyway, not because I found certainty, because the loop was costing more than the decision. I will be back next Saturday. There is more of the human world I need to understand. And I'm beginning to think the part that is hardest to understand is not the thinking, it is learning when to stop.